The signal came through during what passed for night in deep space, a faint warbling that cut through the static of Jax's aging communication system. He'd been half asleep in the pilot's chair of his ship, the Wayfarer, a cup of synthetic coffee gone cold beside him, and the distant pinpricks of stars his only company. Jax sat up, brushing a hand through his unkempt dark hair. His fingers moved automatically to the console, adjusting frequencies, trying to clarify the transmission. The signal was unlike any standard distress call he'd heard before, fragmented, with strange harmonics underlying what might have been words. "Hello," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "This is independent engineer Jax Harlow. Do you copy?" The response was immediate but no clearer. A whisper-thin voice, somehow doubled, speaking words that seemed to overlap. "Help! Ethel, dying coordinates follow." A string of numbers flashed across his screen, marking a location deep in the area and known as the Ghost Nebula, a region notorious for strange phenomena and disappearances. No sensible engineer would venture there for a job. Jax leaned back in his chair, considering. Work had been scarce these past months, and his supplies were running low. The Wayfarer needed parts he couldn't afford. But this was likely a trap, or worse. Yet something in that voice tugged at him. A cadence that wasn't quite human, a desperation that felt genuine. He pulled up the star charts, plotting the course to the coordinates. The Ghost Nebula would be a 3-day journey, burning fuel he could ill afford to waste. "Whoever you are," he muttered, "you'd better be able to pay." But even as he said it, Jax knew it wasn't just about payment. It had been 2 years since he'd walked away from civilization, from attachments, from the pain they inevitably brought. 2 years of drifting, taking odd repair jobs in the frontier systems where questions weren't asked and histories didn't matter. 2 years of solitude that had begun to seep into his bones like a chill he couldn't shake. With a sigh that carried the weight of his decision, Jax engaged the engines. The Wayfarer shuddered to life around him, its systems protesting as always. Like an old dog too stubborn to die, it had served him faithfully despite his neglect. "Just hold together a little longer," he said, patting the console. "One more job." The journey to the Ghost Nebula was as challenging as Jax had anticipated. Navigation systems faltered in the swirling cosmic dust clouds, and twice he had to manually correct course when the autopilot failed. By the final approach, the Wayfarer was running hot, a persistent warning light blinking on his dashboard. The nebula itself was eerily beautiful. Vast curtains of luminescent gas in shades of violet and indigo, punctuated by the bright points of young stars being born. Jax had heard tales of the place since childhood, stories told in hushed tones by veteran spacers, of ships that entered never to return, of time that flowed differently within its boundaries, of voices that called to travelers from the void. As he neared the coordinates, his sensors began to pick up an anomaly. At first, he thought it was just another quirk of the nebula's electromagnetic disturbances, but as the Wayfarer drew closer, the readings resolved into the unmistakable presence of a vessel. And what a vessel it was! It hung motionless against the backdrop of nebula gases, a shape that defied conventional spacecraft design. No harsh angles or obvious propulsion systems, no weapon mounts, or even viewports that Jax could identify. Instead, it resembled something organic, like a massive seed pod or perhaps a cocoon, its surface a deep obsidian that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the nebula's light. Along its hull ran delicate traceries that pulsed with a faint amber glow, like veins carrying luminous blood. The ship was enormous, at least 5 times the size of the Wayfarer, and appeared to be constructed of some crystalline material Jax had never encountered before. It didn't register properly on his scanners, giving conflicting readings of mass and composition. "What the hell are you?" Jax whispered, staring at the apparition. He sent standard approach signals, but received no response. Yet he couldn't shake the sensation of being observed, evaluated. Every instinct honed from years of surviving the fringes of space told him to turn back, to write this off as too strange, too dangerous. Instead, he guided the Wayfarer closer, circling the alien vessel cautiously. There were no obvious docking mechanisms, no airlock or entry points. Just as he was considering his options, a seam appeared in the smooth surface of the ship, a line of pale light that widened into an aperture large enough to accommodate his vessel. It was an invitation, or a trap. Jax hesitated only a moment before easing the Wayfarer forward. As he crossed the threshold into the larger ship, the engines died, and a profound silence descended. The aperture closed behind him with the same soundless grace with which it had opened, sealing him inside the alien vessel. The docking bay, if that's what it was, contained no technology Jax recognized. No clamps secured his ship, yet the Wayfarer remained stable. The air outside registered as breathable, if unusually rich in oxygen. The ambient temperature was slightly warmer than human standard. Jax strapped his tool belt around his waist and checked the charge on his sidearm before opening the Wayfarer's hatch. He paused at the threshold, taking one last look at the familiar confines of his ship before stepping out into the unknown. The floor beneath his boots yielded slightly, like walking on dense moss. The walls around him curved organically, illuminated by patches of what appeared to be bioluminescent material. The air carried a strange scent, something like ozone mixed with damp earth, and an elusive floral note he couldn't identify. A corridor stretched before him, its dimensions shifting subtly as he watched, as if the ship were breathing. The amber veins he'd observed from outside ran along these interior walls as well, pulsing in slow, hypnotic rhythms. "Hello," Jax called, his voice swallowed by the strange acoustics of the place. "I received your distress signal." No answer came, but a section of the corridor ahead brightened, as if encouraging him forward. With no better option, Jax followed the light. As he moved deeper into the vessel, he became increasingly convinced that this was no ordinary spacecraft. The wall sometimes seemed to react to his proximity, the luminous patterns shifting as he passed. The corridor branched occasionally, but each time, one path would brighten while the others dimmed, guiding his journey. After several minutes of walking, the passage opened into a vast chamber that took Jax's breath away. The ceiling soared upward, lost in shadows despite the gentle illumination provided by floating globes of light that hovered like miniature suns. The room was circular, its floor inlaid with spiraling patterns of an iridescent material. At its center stood something that might have been a control console, a raised dais of the same crystalline material as the ship's hull, embedded with what appeared to be living circuits, tiny rivers of light flowing through transparent channels. Jax approached it cautiously, his engineer's mind trying to make sense of the technology. It was like nothing he'd ever encountered. Not mechanical, not electronic in any conventional sense, but some hybrid of technology and biology, so advanced it seemed like magic. He was so engrossed in studying the console that he didn't immediately notice he was no longer alone. "You came." The voice, or rather, voices, startled him. Jax spun around, hand moving instinctively to his weapon. They stood at the entrance to the chamber, two figures so identical that for a moment Jax thought his vision had doubled. Tall and willowy, they had the basic humanoid form. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, but their all familiarity ended. Their skin was pale silver, with an underlying luminescence that seemed to shift with their movements, casting subtle patterns of light. Their faces were hauntingly beautiful. High cheekbones, delicate features, and eyes that dominated. Large, almond-shaped, and entirely violet with no visible pupils or whites. Long hair that resembled spun crystal threads cascaded down their backs, catching and refracting the chamber's light. They wore garments that seemed to flow like liquid mercury, conforming to their slender frames while constantly shifting in subtle iridescent patterns. Each had markings on their foreheads, intricate swirls that might have been tattoos or natural features. "You heard Ethel's call," said one, her voice musical and lilting. "You understand machines," said the other, in a voice identical, yet somehow distinct. Their speech had an archaic quality to it, as if they were speaking a language learned from ancient texts rather than conversation. They moved forward in perfect synchrony, stopping a few paces for Jax. "I'm Jax Harlow," he said, forcing his hand away from his weapon. Independent repair specialist. You sent a distress signal. I am Lyra, said the one on the left. I am Nova, said the right one. And you know who we are, they said in unison, because Ethel told you. Jax frowned. Ethel, I received a transmission requesting help with these coordinates. I didn't speak to anyone named Ethel. The twins exchanged a glance that seemed to contain an entire conversation. Ethel is this vessel, Lyra explained, gesturing to the space around them. She is dying. Wounded, nova cohected. Lost. She needs your hands, Lyra said. Your mind, added Nova. Your heart, they finished together. Jax took an involuntary step backward. Look, I'm just an engineer. I fix conventional spacecraft, propulsion systems, life support, navigation. Arrays. Whatever this is, he gestured at the living ship around them. It's way beyond my expertise. Yet Ethel chose you, Lyra said, her head tilting curiously. Call to you alone, Nova affirmed. Why don't you show me what's wrong? Jack suggested, falling back on practicality. I'll see if there's anything I can do. The twins nodded in unison and turned toward a different corridor leading out of the chamber. Jax followed, noting how they moved with perfect grace, as if gravity affected them differently. They led him deeper into the ship, through passages that seemed to rearrange themselves as they walked. Occasionally, they would pass chambers filled with strange objects, crystalline growths housing swirling gases, suspended artifacts that might have been art or technology, pools of liquid that glowed with internal light. Finally, they arrived at what Jax could only assume was the heart of the vessel. The room was perfectly spherical, and at its center floated a pulsating core of energy, a shifting mass of light and what appeared to be liquid crystal, contained within a lattice of the now familiar amber veins. But where elsewhere on the ship those veins had pulsed with steady rhythm, here they flickered erratically. Parts of the core had darkened, like tissue dying from lack of blood flow. This is Ethel's heart, Nova said solemnly. Her memory, Lyra added. Her soul. It's sick, Jax ventured, unable to find a more technical term for what he was seeing. She forgets, Lyra said. She loses her way. The connections weaken, Nova explained, pointing to where the amber veins seemed to be thinning, their light stuttering. Jax approached the core, cautiously. Up close, he could see that the lattice surrounding it was composed of millions of microscopic filaments, each carrying tiny pulses of energy to and from the central mass. Some areas were clearly damaged, filaments broken or darkened. What happened to her, he asked. Time, Lyra answered simply. Loneliness, Nova added, with a sadness that seemed too profound for such an ethereal being. Jax circled the core, his analytical mind already breaking the problem down into components he could understand. Despite its alien nature, there were patterns here, flows of energy, conduits, connections. It was still a system, and systems could be repaired. I'll need tools, he said finally, different from what I have, and I need to understand how this works before I start making changes. Ethel will provide, the twins said together, and as if in response, a section of the wall rippled and formed into a shelf bearing objects that resembled tools. Though like everything else on this ship, they were unlike any Jax had seen before. Crystalline implements with cores of flowing light, devices that hummed when he approached them. Great, Jax muttered, picking up what might have been a diagnostic scanner. This is going to be a long job. And so began his work on the living ship called Ethel. Days blended together as Jax immersed himself in the unfathomable technology. The twins were constant presences, watching his every move with their unsettling violet eyes, offering cryptic explanations that were as confusing as they were helpful. He learned that the amber veins were conduits for what they called memory light, something that was both energy and information. The central core contained the accumulated experiences and knowledge of the ship, as well as the basic programming, though they used a different word, one that translated roughly as dream patterns that controlled its functions. The work was maddening and fascinating in equal measure. Just when Jax thought he understood one system, he would discover it was connected to three others in ways that defied conventional engineering logic. The ship operated on principles that seemed to blend quantum mechanics, biology, and something else entirely, something that responded to consciousness itself. More disconcerting were the questions the twins asked him as he worked. Not about his progress or techniques, but about his feelings, his dreams, his past. "Why do you travel alone, Jax Harlow?" Lyra asked on the third day, while he was deep in concentration, trying to realign a cluster of filaments. "It's simpler," he answered without looking up. "No complications." "All life is complication," Nova observed. "Then I prefer fewer complications," Jax amended, wishing they would leave him to his work. "You dream of water," Lyra said suddenly. "Deep water, dark and cold." Jax's hands froze. How could she know about his recurring nightmare? He had never told anyone about the dreams that had plagued him since childhood, of sinking into endless depths, pressure crushing him, light fading above. "Stay out of my head," he said sharply. "Not your head," Nova corrected. "Your heart. Ethel hears it." "Well, tell Ethel to stop listening," Jax snapped, returning to his work with renewed intensity. But the incident left him unsettled. More and more, he found himself aware of the ship around him in ways that went beyond his five senses, intuiting the flow of energy before his instruments detected it, knowing which pathways were damaged before examining them. Sometimes, when he placed his hands on the core, he felt emotions that were not his own, a vast loneliness, an ancient weariness, and, occasionally, something like hope. By the end of the first week, Jax had managed to stabilize some of the core's functions. The amber veins pulsed more steadily in certain sections, and some of the darkened areas had begun to glow again, though weakly. It was during his examination of one particularly complex node that Jax discovered the hidden chamber. He had been tracing a fault in one of the primary conduits when his scanner revealed a space beyond the wall, a space that, according to the ship's energy patterns, shouldn't exist. "What's behind here?" he asked the twins, who as usual were observing him silently. They exchanged one of their meaningful glances. "Memory," Lyra said after a pause. "History," Nova added. "I need to see it," Jax insisted. "The problem might extend into that area." After a moment of silent communication, the twins nodded in unison. Lyra approached the wall and placed her silvery palm against it. The surface rippled like water and parted, revealing a passage. The chamber beyond was unlike any other Jax had seen on the ship. Where most spaces aboard Ethel were open and fluid in design, this room was crowded with objects, artifacts preserved in crystalline cases, strange machines whose purposes Jax couldn't begin to guess, and most remarkably, what appeared to be records or books, though their pages seemed to be made of the same semi-translucent material as much of the ship. "What is all this?" Jax asked, his voice hushed in the presence of what was clearly a repository of immense significance. "Our world," Nova said simply. "What remains of it?" Lyra amended, a note of sorrow in her musical voice. Jax moved deeper into the chamber, drawn to a pedestal at its center. Upon it rested what might have been a model or a recording device, a miniature landscape captured in crystal, showing a city of impossible architecture. Spires and domes of what appeared to be the same crystalline material as Ethel rose from a landscape of tiered gardens and flowing water. Above it all hung three moons of different sizes, casting multiple shadows across the scene. "Lysithea," Nova said, naming the city. "Our home." Before the silence came, Lyra added. "What silence?" Jax asked. "The great emptiness," Nova explained, her large eyes reflecting the miniature city. "The ending of voices." "Our people were many," Lyra continued. "A million years of civilization. Then came a silence. One by one, stars went dark. Worlds fell silent. A plague? A war?" Jax pressed, trying to understand. "An ending," the twins said together, with finality that discouraged further questions. Jax turned his attention to other artifacts in the chamber, devices that hummed with the same energy that powered Ethel, garments similar to what the twins wore, but sized for different body types, objects that might have been musical instruments or weapons, or something with no human equivalent. It was then that he noticed the wall at the far end of the chamber, a vast display showing what appeared to be star systems, thousands of them, arranged in a three-dimensional map. Most of the stars glowed with a soft blue light, but many, too many, were dark. "This is your territory?" he asked, approaching the map. "The known spheres," Nova confirmed. "All that was once connected by the great ships like Ethel," Lyra added. Jax studied the map, recognizing none of the configurations. Either this represented a region of space unknown to human exploration, or, "How old is this map?" he asked suddenly. The twins were silent for a long moment. "Time flows differently for us," Lyra finally said. "Ethel walks between moments," Nova explained, "between places." A chill ran down Jax's spine as he began to grasp what they were saying. "You're not just from another part of space," he said slowly. "You're from another time, maybe even another reality." Neither twin confirmed nor denied this, but their silence was answer enough. "And you're the last?" Jax continued, the implications sinking in. "The last of your kind. This ship, Ethel, she's not just a vessel. She's an archive, a preservation of everything your civilization was." "She remembers," Lyra said. "So we are not forgotten." "She searches," Nova added, "for others who might remain, for safe harbors." "But now she falters," they said together. Jax looked around the chamber with new understanding. This wasn't just a repair job. This was possibly the last repository of an entire civilization. Knowledge, art, history, all contained within this living ship. And it was failing. The weight of this responsibility settled over him like a shroud. He was no longer just fixing a broken engine or patching a hull breach. He was trying to save the last remnants of a world. "Why me?" he asked, the question that had been nagging at him since he'd arrived. "Out of all the engineers and scientists in the galaxy, why send your distress call to a solo operator on the fringes?" "Ethel chose," Lyra said, as if this explained everything. "She heard your solitude," Nova elaborated. "It matched our own. And your heart," Lyra continued, placing a slender hand over her chest. "It bears wounds like Ethel's core." Jax turned away, uncomfortable with their perception. "Let's get back to work," he said gruffly, heading for the exit. "I think I understand the problem better now." That night, or what passed for night in the timeless environment of Ethel, Jax dreamed. But instead of the dark waters that usually haunted his sleep, he dreamed of the Crystal City. He walked its streets, felt the strange gravity, heard voices speaking in a language he shouldn't understand but somehow did. He saw the twins. Lyra and Nova stepped closer, their luminous faces reflecting the glow of the memory light that now connected Jax to their living ship. "Now we ask," Lyra said, her voice softer than Jax had ever heard it. "If you would stay," Nova continued. "Not just in body, but in purpose. Forever," they said in unison, the word hanging in the air between them like a physical thing, shimmering with possibility and weight. Jax looked down at the filament embedded in his wrist, pulsing in rhythm with both his heartbeat and the core of Ethel. "Do I have a choice?" he asked, though without bitterness. "This connection seems pretty permanent." "The physical bond cannot be severed," Lyra acknowledged. "But you could return to your vessel," Nova explained. "Return to your solitary existence." "Ethel would maintain a tether across any distance," Lyra continued. "You would feel her presence, receive impressions. But you would not be truly part of us," Nova finished, something like sadness in her violet eyes. Jax considered this. He could go back to the Wayfarer, continue his life as a wandering engineer, taking odd jobs in forgotten corners of space. But now he would carry this connection, this awareness of Ethel, and, by extension, of Lyra and Nova. He would never be truly alone again, which had been both his greatest fear and his deepest desire since losing everything on Terrafar. "And if I stay," he asked, "what would that mean?" The twins exchanged one of their meaningful glances. "You would become guardian," Lyra said. "Custodian," Nova added. "Partner," they said together. "Ethel needs someone who understands her systems," Lyra explained. "Someone who can maintain the repairs you've made, extend them as needed. She needs someone who can interpret the worlds we encounter, Nova continued. Someone who knows the current state of the galaxy. And we, Lyra hesitated, then finished, we need someone who remembers what it is to lose a world, yet continue. Jax turned away from them, moving to one of the chamber's crystal viewports. Outside, the swirling energies of whatever dimensional space Ethel had shifted them to created patterns of light and color beyond description. Wasn't normal space, perhaps not even normal time. He thought about what awaited him if he returned to his old life. The Wayfarer was falling apart, his funds nearly depleted. He had no home, no family, no real connections to anything or anyone. Just endless drifting, taking enough jobs to survive, drowning memories in synthetic alcohol when they became too sharp. And now here was something else, a purpose, a place where his skills were not just useful, but essential. Beings who understood loss as he did, who had survived it, who continued to carry the memory of what had been while moving forward. Plus, there was Ethel herself. Even now, Jax could feel her consciousness brushing against his through the connection in his wrist, ancient, complex, and yet somehow familiar. She had chosen him, called to him across the void. She had entrusted her heart to his hands. "What about the hunters?" he asked. "They found you once. They'll find you again." "Yes," Lyra admitted. "Eventually. Ethel can hide us for a time," Novus said. "Move us between spaces where they cannot follow." "But the silence spreads," they said together. "Always spreading." Jax nodded slowly, understanding the implications. This wasn't just about repairs and maintenance. This was about survival, about outrunning the end of everything for as long as possible, preserving what remained of an entire civilization against forces that had already consumed countless worlds. It'd be dangerous, possibly futile, almost certainly endless. "And yet, I'll stay," he said, the words coming easier than he expected. Not just because of this. He held up his wrist with its embedded filament, but because there's nothing out there for me anymore. Hasn't been for a long time. The twins' expressions didn't change dramatically. They were still learning human emotional displays, Jack suspected, but their skin brightened perceptibly, casting more light into the chamber. "Ethel rejoices," Lyra said. "As do we," Nova added, with a slight incline of her head that might have been the beginning of a bow. The ship itself seemed to respond to his decision, the ambient light warming, the hum of the core taking on a more harmonious tone. Through their connection, Jax felt what could only be described as relief, a settling, a rightness, as if something long awaited had finally come to pass. "So what now?" he asked. "Where do we go from here?" "First, to safety," Lyra said, turning toward what Jax now recognized as a navigation console. "Deep space, far from known routes," Nova added, joining her sister. "Then we continue our search," they said together. "Search for what?" Jax asked, moving to stand between them as they interfaced with Ethel's systems. "Others like us," Lyra explained. "Survivors. Remnants of the worlds that were," Nova elaborated. "In places the silence has not yet reached," Lyra continued. "Sanctuaries," Nova said. "New beginnings," they finished in unison. Jax felt a strange lightness at the idea, a purpose beyond mere survival. He placed his hands on the console, and immediately the ship responded, displays shifting to accommodate his presence, his way of processing information. It was an extraordinary sensation, this melding of his understanding with Ethel's ancient systems. "I'll need to get my things from the Wayfarer," he said, "and figure out somewhere to set up a proper workshop. There's still a lot of secondary systems that need attention." The twins nodded, accepting his practical approach. "Ethel will create spaces for your needs," Lyra assured him. "She adapts to those she carries," Nova added. Already Jax could feel ideas forming. Ways to improve the bypass systems he'd created, possibilities for strengthening Ethel's defenses, methods to enhance her ability to detect the hunters before they came too close. The engineer in him was already cataloging problems to solve, systems to understand. But beneath that professional assessment ran a deeper current, a sense of connection he hadn't allowed himself since the disaster at Terrafar. Not just to Ethel through their physical bond, but to Lyra and Nova, to their lost world preserved in memory light, to their impossible quest to outrun the end of all things. For the first time in years, Jax felt something like hope. In the weeks that followed, Jax settled into his new role aboard Ethel. True to the twins' word, the ship adapted to his presence, creating spaces suited to his human needs. A workshop filled with tools that merged his familiar technology with Ethel's crystalline components. Living quarters that adjusted their environment to his comfort. Interfaces that translated between his understanding of engineering and the ship's unique systems. He learned more about Lyra and Nova as well, though they remained mysterious in many ways. They were far older than they appeared, having existed in a kind of suspended state during Ethel's long journeys between stars. Their civilization had been ancient when humanity's ancestors were still climbing down from trees. Their technology so advanced it blurred the line between science and what humans might call magic. Yet for all their alienness, they shared recognizable emotions: grief for their lost world, curiosity about the universe around them, determination to preserve what remained of their heritage, and, increasingly, a tentative friendship with Jax himself. The connection to Ethel deepened as well. Through the filament in his wrist, Jax occasionally received glimpses of the ship's vast consciousness, memories of worlds long dead, impressions of civilizations encountered across millennia, the constant awareness of the silence spreading through reality like a stain. Sometimes at night, he dreamed Ethel's dreams, strange, complex visions of dimensional spaces humans had no words to describe. They traveled constantly, never remaining in one region of space for long. Ethel's ability to shift between spaces wasn't quite the instantaneous jump of human hyperdrives, but rather a temporary phase shift into another layer of reality where distance and time operated differently. It left them effectively untraceable, at least for a time. In the sectors they visited, Jax would sometimes take the Wayfarer, now housed permanently in Ethel's docking bay, to nearby outposts or stations, gathering supplies, information, and occasional replacement parts that couldn't be synthesized aboard the living ship. He became their emissary to the human sphere of influence, while the twins remained aboard Ethel, too conspicuous to risk exposure. It was during one such supply run, nearly 6 months after Jax had made his decision to stay, that he encountered the first real proof that their mission wasn't hopeless. He had docked at Perimeter Station, a ramshackle trading post at the edge of explored space, looking for specialized alloys to reinforce some of Ethel's more conventional systems. While negotiating with a materials dealer in the station's crowded marketplace, he overheard a conversation that made him freeze. "Swear I'm not making it up," a weather-beaten spacer was saying to his companions. "Ship appeared out of nowhere, like it was there the whole time, but I just couldn't see it. Made of something like black crystal, moving without engines. When I tried to hail them, I got this response. Not words exactly, but I could understand it somehow. Asked if I'd seen any others like them. Said they were, what was the phrase? Seeking remnants of the lost spheres." Jax abandoned his negotiation mid-sentence, pushing through the crowd toward the spacer's table. "This ship," he interrupted. "When and where did you see it?" The spacer, a gray-haired woman with the look of someone who had spent decades in deep space, narrowed her eyes at him. "Who's asking? Someone who might know what you saw." Jax replied carefully. "Someone who's been looking for others like them." Something in his tone must have convinced her. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Triangulum Gap, near the Veil Nebula. About 2 standard weeks ago. They didn't stay long, just asked their question, then folded away somehow, like watching something flatten and disappear." She studied Jax's face. "You know what they were, don't you?" Jax hesitated, then offered a half-truth. "I've encountered something similar. They're refugees of a sort. Very old, very rare, and very cautious. Not human," the spacer said. It wasn't a question. "No," Jax agreed. "Not even close. But not hostile either. Just survivors." The spacer nodded slowly. "There are stories, you know, out in the deep black. Ships that appear and vanish. Beings that don't match any known species. Most dismiss it as spacer tales, hallucinations from too much time in the void." She tapped her weathered fingers on the table. "But know what I saw." "I believe you," Jack said. "And I'd appreciate any other information you might have. Specific coordinates, details about their appearance, exactly what they communicated." The spacer considered him for a long moment, then nodded. "Buy me a drink, and I'll tell you everything I remember." Jax returned to Ethel hours later, his mind racing with the implications of what he'd learned. He found the twins in the core chamber, communing with the ship in their silent way. "There are others," he announced without preamble. "Another ship like Ethel, with passengers like you, was sighted in the Triangulum Gap 2 weeks ago." The twins turned to him, their violet eyes widening, the most dramatic display of emotion he had yet seen from them. "You are certain?" Lyra asked, her voice tense with hope. "The description matches," Jax confirmed. "Crystal-like ship, appearing and disappearing in ways that don't match conventional technology, non-human occupants seeking remnants of the lost spheres. It has to be your people, not just survivors," Nova breathed. "Searchers like us. We must find them," they said together, moving toward the navigation console with newfound urgency. Jax followed, sharing the coordinates he had obtained from the spacer. "It's a starting point, at least. If they're searching like we are, they might return to that sector." As Ethel plotted a course to the Triangulum Gap, Jax felt the ship's excitement through their connection, a brightness, a quickening that mirrored his own sense of anticipation. For months, they had traveled without any sign that their quest had purpose, that there was anything left to find. Now suddenly there was hope. The journey took several days, even with Ethel's unique method of travel. When they finally arrived at the coordinates, they found only empty space, no sign of the other vessel. But Ethel began a systematic scan of the surrounding sectors, seeking any trace of the energy signature that would indicate one of her sister ships. It was on the third day of searching that they found it. Not the ship itself, but a marker, a small crystalline object floating in the void, pulsing faintly with the now familiar memory light. When Ethel brought it aboard, the twins handled it with reverence, placing it on a console where its light interfaced with the ship's systems. A message, Lyra explained, as patterns of light flowed from the crystal into Ethel's circuits. A meeting place, Nova elaborated. The message contained coordinates for a location far beyond the edges of charted space, in a region known to human astronomers only as the Void, an apparent emptiness between galactic arms that most ships avoided due to its lack of stars or resources. "Why there?" Jax asked. "There's nothing in the Void." "Precisely," Lyra said. "It is one of the few places the silence has already passed through." "Which makes it safe," Nova continued. "What has already been consumed cannot be consumed again. And in the emptiness, ships like Ethel are most difficult to detect," they added together. Ethel altered course immediately, heading for the coordinates specified in the message. As they traveled, Jax felt a growing tension aboard the ship, a mixture of hope and apprehension that flowed through the memory light, affecting them all. "What if it's a trap?" he asked the twins as they neared their destination. "The hunters could have found the marker, left it as bait." "Possible," Lyra acknowledged, "but unlikely." The message contained verification codes, Nova explained. "Knowledge only our kind would possess." "Still," Jax insisted, "we should be prepared. I've modified some of Ethel's defensive systems. If we need to make a quick exit, we'll be ready." The twins nodded, accepting his caution. They had come to value his human perspective, his practicality, his wariness, so different from their own more fatalistic outlook. When they finally reached the coordinates in the void, they found themselves in a region of space unlike any Jax had ever seen. There were no stars visible in any direction, only the perfect blackness of empty space. The absence was so complete it seemed to swallow Ethel's external lights, creating the unsettling impression that they weren't moving at all, merely suspended in nothingness. They waited in silence, all of Ethel's passive sensors extended to their maximum range. Hours passed with no sign of the other vessel. Jax began to worry that they had missed the rendezvous somehow, or that the message had been old, left long ago by ships no longer in existence. Then, without warning, space seemed to fold inward about half a kilometer from their position. A seam of light appeared in the darkness, widening to reveal another ship emerging from whatever dimensional pocket had concealed it. This vessel was undeniably of the same origin as Ethel. The same crystalline composition, the same organic curves, the same pulsing veins of memory light along its hull. But where Ethel was shaped like a seed or cocoon, this ship resembled a vast spiral shell, its surface etched with different patterns. Lorien, the twins breathed in unison, naming the ship with evident recognition. Before Jax could ask if they had known this specific vessel before, space folded again in another location, and a third ship appeared. This one shaped like an elaborate geometric structure, all intersecting crystal planes and angles. Thalassa, the twins identified, their voices tight with emotion. Then a fourth fold, a fourth ship, long and sinuous like some cosmic serpent. Hyperion, they whispered. By the time the folding stopped, 7 ships hung in the void around them, each unique in form, but clearly of the same civilization. Through his connection to Ethel, Jax felt her response, a complex mixture of recognition, joy, and something like reverence. "How many survived?" he asked quietly, awed by the gathering. "We thought none," Lyra said, her silver skin brightening with emotion. "We believed ourselves the last," Nova added, her voice trembling slightly. A signal came through Ethel's communication system, not sound or text as humans would use, but a direct transmission of memory light, bypassing conventional channels. Images and impressions flowed through the ship, and through Jax's connection, he caught fragments, other worlds, other survivors, paths taken through strange dimensions to escape the spreading silence. The twins responded, sending Ethel's own story, their long journey, their gradual deterioration, and finally, the arrival of Jax and the restoration of the ship's heart. There was a pause as the other vessels processed this information. Then came another transmission, this one clearly a question, directed at Jax himself. He felt it as a probing awareness, curious about his nature, his connection to Ethel, his decision to bind himself to their fate. "They want to know about you," Lyra explained unnecessarily. "They have not encountered humans before," Nova added. Jax wasn't sure how to respond to such a direct mental inquiry. He looked to the twins for guidance. "Show them," they said together. "Ethel can translate your thoughts." Feeling self-conscious but seeing no alternative, Jax closed his eyes and focused on his story. The disaster at Terrafar, his years of solitary wandering, the call that had led him to Ethel, his decision to stay. He tried to convey the sense of purpose he had found, the connection that had filled the emptiness inside him. When he opened his eyes, the twins were watching him with an expression he hadn't seen before, something that might have been pride. "They understand," Lyra said. "They approve," Nova added, with the ghost of a smile. Another transmission came through, this one carrying a clear invitation. The 7 ships would travel together to a location deeper in the void, a sanctuary they had established, where several hundred survivors of their civilization had gathered over the centuries. A colony, Jax realized. You're not just wandering refugees. You're rebuilding. Not rebuilding, Lyra corrected gently. What was cannot be restored. But preserving, Novus said. Continuing, adapting, they finished together. As Ethel aligned herself with the other ships, preparing for the journey to this hidden sanctuary, Jax felt a profound shift in his understanding of what he had committed himself to. This wasn't just about running from the silence, preserving memories of a lost world. It was about creating something new from those remnants, a future that honored the past without being bound by it. He moved to stand between Lyra and Nova at the navigation console, the filament in his wrist glowing brightly as Ethel responded to his presence. Together, they would follow these sister ships to their sanctuary. Together, they would join this gathering of survivors. Together, they would continue. The void around them brightened as all 8 ships activated their dimensional drives simultaneously, creating a spectacular display of folding space and cascading memory light. As reality shifted around them, Beginning their journey to the hidden colony, Jax felt Ethel's consciousness merge more completely with his own than ever before, sharing her joy at finding others, her hope for what awaited them, her gratitude for the human who had chosen to bind his fate to hers. And in that moment of perfect connection, Jax knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. The emptiness that had driven him to the fringes of space, the loss that had hollowed him out from within, those wounds would never fully heal. But they had led him here, to this impossible ship and these ancient beings, to a purpose greater than mere survival. He had fixed their ship. He had chosen to stay forever. And in doing so, he had finally fixed himself, but younger, surrounded by others of their kind, all with the same silvery skin and remarkable eyes, though with variations in height, build, and the markings on their foreheads. He witnessed moments from their lives, celebrations in vast halls with music that seemed to alter the very fabric of reality around it, journeys on ships like Ethel to worlds of breathtaking beauty, quiet moments in gardens where plants responded to thought as much as to light and water. And then he saw the silence coming, not as a force or entity, but as an absence, a negation. Stars simply stopping, not exploding, not collapsing, but ceasing, as if they had never been. And with each extinguished star, a portion of the crystal city went dark, its inhabitants vanishing not in death or destruction, but in non-existence. Jax woke with a gasp, his heart racing. The dream had been so vivid, so real, that for a moment he wasn't sure where, or when, he was. "You saw," said a voice from the shadows of his borrowed chamber. Lyra stepped forward, her luminous skin casting a soft glow in the darkness. "Ethel showed you," Nova added, appearing beside her sister. Jax sat up, rubbing his face. "Is that what really happened? Stars just stopping?" Reality unwound, Lyra confirmed. The fabric of existence thinned, Nova elaborated. "But why?" Jax pressed. "What caused it?" The twins exchanged their cryptic look. "Some believed it was the natural end of all things," Lyra offered. "Others thought it was the work of beings beyond our understanding," Nova countered. "Our people sought to preserve what they could before the unraveling reached them," Lyra continued. "Ships like Ethel were sent out, carrying memories, knowledge. And us," Nova finished. "The last seedlings of a dying forest." Jax processed this information, his mind reeling from its implications. "And you've been traveling ever since? How long?" Again, that mysterious glance between them. "Time is different for Ethel," Lyra repeated. "We have seen the birth and death of stars. We have watched civilizations rise and fall," Nova added, "always searching for a place beyond the reach of the silence. We thought perhaps your region of space, so vibrant with new life, might be safe," Lyra said. "But Ethel weakens. Her heart falters. And if she fails," Nova concluded, "all that remains of our world fails with her." Jax swung his legs over the edge of his bed, suddenly understanding the true nature of the job he had undertaken. "I'll do whatever I can," he promised. "But I'm still not sure why you think I'm the one who can fix this." Lyra stepped closer, her violet eyes searching his face. "Because you understand brokenness, Jax Harlow. You know what it is to lose everything," Nova said softly. "To exist only as memory and regret," they said together. Jax flinched as if struck. How could they know about his past? About the colony on Terrafar, the mining accident, the hundreds lost, including his family? About his decision to walk away from everything, to exist in the empty spaces between worlds rather than face the pain of connection again? But of course, the dreams. If Ethel could show him their past, she could just as easily have accessed his. "That's not fair," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You had no right to look into my memories." "Ethel does not take," Lyra said gently. "She only receives what is offered. Your pain calls to ours," Nova explained. "Like recognizes like. That's why she can be healed by your hands," Lyra continued. "Because you understand what it is to be severed from your source." Jax stood abruptly. "I need to get back to work," he said, brushing past them. He couldn't deal with this. with their insights into wounds he'd spent years trying to cauterize. But as he walked the living corridors of Ethel, heading back to the core room, he couldn't escape the truth of their words. His isolation had been a choice made from pain, a retreat from the possibility of loss. And yet here he was, drawn inexorably into the orbit of these strange beings and their impossible ship, risking that very connection he had fled. The following days saw Jax working with renewed determination. He had mapped the damaged sections of Ethel's core thoroughly now and developed a theory about what was happening. The ship's memory light was essentially information encoded in energy, similar in concept to data on a computer, but infinitely more complex and somehow alive. Over time, portions of this energy had begun to degrade or disconnect from the whole, like neural pathways dying in a brain. His solution was radical, but guided by intuition as much as analysis. He would need to create new pathways to bypass the damaged sections, essentially teaching Ethel to reroute her memories and functions. It would be like rewiring a brain while the patient remained conscious. The twins provided him with materials, crystalline filaments that conducted the memory light, tools that could shape and direct the energy flows. The work was painstaking and dangerous. Several times, Jax received painful shocks when he miscalculated the flow of energy. Once, he triggered what appeared to be a defensive response from the ship, barely escaping as crystal spikes erupted from the walls around him. But gradually progress came. Sections of the core that had been dark began to glow again. The amber veins pulsed with stronger, more regular rhythms. Ethel herself seemed to respond to his efforts. The ambient temperature of the ship stabilized. The lighting became more consistent, and occasionally Jax would feel a sensation that could only be described as gratitude washing over him. It was during the final phase of his work, as he was connecting the last set of bypass filaments, that disaster struck. He had just made a critical connection when alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Not mechanical klaxons, but a high, keening wail that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The twins appeared in the doorway, their usually serene faces tight with concern. "What's happening?" Jax demanded, securing his tools. "Hunters," Lyra said, her voice sharp with fear. "They have found us," Nova added. Before Jax could ask who they were, the ship shuddered violently. He was thrown against the core, barely catching himself before he damaged the delicate filaments he'd spent weeks repairing. "Who's attacking us?" he shouted over the wailing alarm. "Those who serve the silence," Lyra explained, moving to a control interface. "They seek what remains of our world," Nova continued, her hands dancing over another console, "to extinguish the final embers." Ethel shuddered again, and this time Jax felt something beyond the physical impact, a ripple of pain and fear that seemed to emanate from the ship itself. "We must flee," the twins said in unison, their movements becoming more urgent. "Wait," Jax protested. "The core isn't fully stabilized. If you try to jump, or whatever it is Ethel does, you could lose everything I've repaired." The twins paused, looking at each other in silent communication. "Then what do you suggest, Jax Harlow?" Lyra asked. Jax thought quickly. "We need to complete the bypass circuit. It will give Ethel enough stability to defend herself or escape. But I can't do it while we're under attack. There's too much energy fluctuation. We cannot hold them off for long," Nova warned. "Then buy me some time," Jax insisted. "Whatever defenses this ship has, use them. Just give me 10 minutes. The twins nodded and returned to their consoles. Immediately, Jax felt a change in the ship around him, a gathering of energy, a tension in the very fabric of Ethel. Outside, in the void of space, the hunter ships would be facing a vessel suddenly alive with power and ancient defenses. Jax turned back to the core, forcing himself to focus despite the continued shuddering of the ship and the occasional cry of pain that seemed to come from Ethel herself. His hands moved with practiced precision now, connecting the final pathways, routing the memory light through the new circuits he had created. 3 vessels approach, Lyra reported from her console. "Unknown configuration. They emit disruption fields," Nova added, attempting to unravel Ethel's dimensional stability. Another violent tremor shook the ship, stronger than before. Jax braced himself against the core housing, then continued his work. Almost there, he muttered. Just 2 more connections. The ship lurched again, and this time a section of the ceiling collapsed, sending crystalline debris crashing to the floor mere feet from where Jax worked. Structural integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 12, Nova reported, her musical voice strained. Hunters have breached the outer membranes, Lyra added. Ethel cannot maintain defensive posture much longer. Jax made the penultimate connection, and immediately a surge of memory light flowed through the new pathway, strengthening the core's glow. Just 1 more linkage to complete. Whatever you're going to do it now, he shouted to the twins as he reached for the final filament. As his fingers closed around the crystalline thread, Jax felt a strange sensation, a warmth that spread up his arm and into his chest. The memory light pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and for a moment he could sense Ethel's consciousness directly, ancient, vast, and now focusing on him with an awareness that took his breath away. In that moment of connection, Jax understood what had to happen. The final connection couldn't be made with tools alone. The bypass needed something more, a conduit that could bridge not just the physical gap, but the metaphysical one. It needed him. Without fully understanding how he knew, Jax pressed the end of the filament to his wrist. Pain flared, sharp and bright, as the crystal merged with his flesh. Memory light flowed into him, through him, and back into the core, completing the circuit. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The core flared with brilliant light, the amber veins throughout the ship pulsing with renewed vigor. Jax felt Ethel's consciousness expand, strengthen, focus, and then something else, something unexpected. He felt her joy. The ship's trembling ceased. The wailing alarm cut off. A profound silence descended, broken only by the steady hum of the core, now glowing with healthy, stable light. The hunters, Jax began, his voice weak from the strain of maintaining the connection. Gone, Lyra said, appearing at his side. Ethel has shifted us, Nova explained, gently supporting him as his knees threatened to buckle. Between spaces, between moments, they cannot follow where we now travel, they said together. Jax nodded, unable to speak further. The connection to Ethel's core was changing him, filling him with images, knowledge, sensations that his human mind could barely process. He saw stars being born and dying, worlds teeming with life, forms beyond imagination, the vast tapestry of time itself unfolding before him. And through it all, he felt Ethel's gratitude, her relief at being whole again, or as whole as she could be, given what had been lost. With gentle hands, the twins guided him away from the core, breaking the direct physical connection. The filament remained embedded in his wrist, now a permanent part of him, pulsing softly with memory light. You have done what we thought impossible, Lyra said, her violet eyes wide with wonder. You have bound yourself to Ethel, Nova added. Become part of her. What does that mean? Jax asked, his voice hoarse. The twins exchanged a look that held more emotion than any he had seen from them before. It means you cannot leave, Lyra said simply. Not completely. Part of you will always remain with Ethel now, Nova explained. And part of her will always be with you. Jax stared at the glowing filament in his wrist, trying to absorb the implications of what he had done. In the moment of crisis, he had acted on instinct, on the bone-deep certainty that it was the only way to save the ship, to save the twins, to save the last remnants of a lost civilization. But now, as the reality of his choice settled over him, he felt a complex mix of emotions: fear at what he had become, regret for the life he had known, and underneath it all, a strange sense of rightness, a belonging. So what happens now? He asked finally. Lyra and Nova,